The galaxies stretched outward in endless firelit swathes, each system a jewel, each star a reminder of how small humanity still was in comparison to its neighbors. Commander Elias Vaynar knew this better than most. He had fought in campaigns where human warships were barely tolerated guests among fleets that could erase cities with a gesture. He had seen the way alien officers looked at him, curiosity tinted with contempt, as though watching a clever beast mimic strategy. Humanity was the newest arrival to the grand stage, and though Elias wore his uniform with pride, he understood how fragile that pride was against the weight of galactic politics. Earth's leadership had made desperate bargains to buy survival. Loans for technology, contracts for resources, promises made in ink and blood to species whose wealth could crush entire worlds. Now the debt had become a noose. Reports piled on his desk like gravestones, calculations that proved Earth could never repay what it owed. Default meant more than bankruptcy. It meant servitude. It meant losing not only freedom, but dignity. Elias read the numbers once, then closed the data slate with a snap. He already knew what his superiors would do. They would trade a life to buy time. And somehow, they had chosen his. The summons came at dawn. A ship belonging to the Rylian dynasty, one of the wealthiest and most ruthless alien houses, drifted above the orbital station where he was stationed. Its hull gleamed with liquid silver patterns, light sliding across it like oil on water. Elias was brought into the council chamber, where his commanding officer, Admiral Kieran Holt, waited with tired eyes. Holt had been his mentor since his academy days, a man of flinty pragmatism who had taught him the difference between glory and survival. Now he looked 10 years older, his shoulders bent beneath invisible weight. "The Rylian want a union," Holt said without preamble. His voice was gravel, stripped of emotion. "They've agreed to cancel most of Earth's debt in exchange for one of their daughters marrying a human officer of recognized status. They named you." The words struck Elias like cold iron. He stood rigid, fists curling at his sides. "They mean to chain us through ceremony. To parade a human as proof of submission." Holt didn't deny it. "They mean to keep Earth alive. And alive is better than ashes." Elias's jaw tightened. He had survived battles against enemies whose weapons outmatched his ship's 3-1, yet the idea of standing at an altar as some alien's groom felt more humiliating than any defeat. He imagined the Rylian laughing in their luminous halls, whispering about the primitive consort tethered to one of their aristocrats. Every instinct in him rebelled, but he could not refuse. To do so would be to condemn his people to ruin. When the Rylian delegation entered, Elias forced himself into stillness. They were tall and elegant, skin patterned with shifting light that traced their veins like constellations. Their presence carried the gravity of ancient wealth, their movements deliberate as if each gesture were carved into ritual. At their head stood Lord Arden Rylian, a man whose stare was polished steel. Flanking him were attendants and a veiled figure, slight, draped in silks that shimmered with bioluminescent threads. Elias's eyes caught the faint tremor of her shoulders, the tilt of her head downward. She did not lift her gaze once during the proceedings. The negotiations were swift, for there was nothing to negotiate. Arden spoke of honor, of alliance, of debts forgiven and bridges built. Holt nodded where required. Elias signed where demanded. And when the veiled girl's name was spoken, Lyri Rylian, she made no sound at all. Her silence pressed heavier on him than the weight of signatures and seals. He had expected disdain in her, some gesture of superiority at being bound to a human. Instead, he saw only the faint gleam of wetness on her cheeks as she turned her face away. The ceremony of betrothal was sealed in a language Elias barely understood, yet the meaning was clear. He was no longer his own. His hand, once sworn only to duty and command, now belonged to a pact written in alien tradition. When the meeting dispersed, he found himself staring at the retreating figure of the girl, wondering if her tears were for him or for herself. He told himself it didn't matter. She had been forced into this as much as he had. But the image lingered. Later, alone in his quarters, Elias sat at his desk, staring at the reflection in the viewport glass. His own face looked back at him, scarred, weathered, disciplined. A soldier's face, not a politician's. Not a husband's. He thought of Holt's warning, survival requires bending. But even as he repeated the words, something hardened inside him. He would bend, yes, because Earth demanded it. But he would not break. The galaxy expected a docile groom, a symbol of humanity's submission. Elias clenched his fists, feeling the calluses bite into his palms. Let them think what they would. He would stand tall in whatever cage they built around him. In the silence, he whispered the oath that had carried him through every battle. Humanity bows to no empire. If they thought him a pawn, they would learn that pawns, in the right hands, could become something far more dangerous. The wedding awaited, and with it, the storm. The day of the union unfolded beneath vaulted arches of glass and light, the Rylian capital aglow with its customary grandeur. Towers shimmered with cascading radiance, each surface pulsing with bioluminescent designs that shifted like the tides of an ocean. To Elias Vaynar, the spectacle felt more like a display of conquest than a celebration. Every alien gaze that followed him through the ceremonial halls carried the same condescension, as though they were watching a curiosity, a human groom brought forward to play his part in an arrangement none believed equal. He bore their scrutiny in silence, each step measured, each breath heavy with control. Admiral Holt walked beside him until the threshold, his expression carved from stone. "Remember," he said quietly, "they want you diminished. You give them that, they win twice. Walk proud, even if you choke on it." Elias gave no reply, but the words anchored themselves inside him. He stepped into the chamber alone, where hundreds of alien nobles waited in tiers of translucent balconies. The air vibrated faintly with the hum of their telepathic resonance, a sound that pressed into his skull like distant thunder. At the far end of the aisle, Lord Arden Rylian stood tall, his presence radiating the kind of authority only centuries of lineage could breed. Beside him, the veiled bride remained perfectly still, hands folded, head inclined in practiced obedience. Elias noted the curve of her shoulders, fragile beneath the weight of expectation. He forced his eyes forward and advanced. Each footfall echoed against the crystalline floor, a reminder of how alone he truly was in that moment. The ceremony began with words recited in Rylian dialect, phrases heavy with layered meanings Elias could not parse. Yet he understood the shape of the ritual, vows of guardianship, oaths of blood, and debt entwined. At the appointed time, he spoke his part in clear, unwavering tones, his voice cutting against the chamber's reverberations. When Lyri's turn came, her voice was soft, the words flowing like a practiced melody. Elias glanced sideways and caught the shimmer of moisture at the corner of her eye before she lowered her head again. It was not disdain. It was resignation. That realization unsettled him more than any look of hatred might have. Once the vows were sealed by the luminous exchange of light across their joined hands, the assembly erupted in a ripple of sound, alien approval, tinged with amusement. Elias felt the sting of mockery in it, though none spoke openly. He held himself rigid, jaw clenched, the consummate officer. Let them whisper, he told himself. Survival came first. Later, when the formalities ended, he found himself introduced to a cluster of Rylian nobles. Their words dripped with courtesy sharpened into knives. One leaned closer, his patterns glowing faintly as he remarked, "You wear our traditions with surprising grace, Commander. One might almost mistake you for civilized." Elias met his eyes, steel meeting silver. "Civilization," he replied, "is measured in honor, not ornament." The noble recoiled, his smile tightening, and Elias moved on without pause. Admiral Holt intercepted him briefly, his tone low and edged. "Careful. You bite too sharply, and they'll make you bleed for it." Elias inclined his head, but did not apologize. He had already swallowed enough humiliation to fill a lifetime. That night, in the private quarters assigned to him and his new wife, silence settled like a wall. The chamber was lavish, carved from living crystal that pulsed faintly with ambient light. Leary sat near the far window, her posture carefully composed, her gaze fixed on the alien city that sprawled beneath them. She did not turn when Elias entered. For a long moment he considered leaving her undisturbed, playing the role of polite stranger, nothing more. Yet the memory of her trembling voice during the vows lingered. He spoke at last, his tone steady, stripped of ceremony. "I will not force closeness where it is unwelcome. You and I were both bound here by necessity, not choice. I will keep my duties, and I will keep my distance." For the first time, she turned to look at him. Her eyes, luminous in the half-light, were red-rimmed but steady. No words followed, only the faintest incline of her head. It was acknowledgement, perhaps even relief. Elias accepted it as enough. In the days that followed, whispers shadowed him everywhere. The nobility mocked in private, their disdain unhidden, while alien emissaries observed his every move for weakness. He responded with the same unflinching composure he carried on battlefields, yet inside he felt the weight of invisible chains. His role was no longer merely soldier. He had become symbol. Every gesture, every misstep, would reflect not only on him but on the entire human race. One evening, as he sparred in the training chamber to exhaust his restlessness, Holt entered, watching from the threshold. When Elias paused, sweat trailing down his temples, Holt muttered, "You've been forged into a weapon they mean to display, boy. But remember, display pieces are fragile. You break, they'll sweep away the shards and laugh while they do it." Elias met his mentor's eyes, breath steadying. "I didn't endure wars just to shatter now." The older man grunted, half approval, half warning, and departed without further word. That night, Elias stood again before the window, the alien skyline a sea of light. Behind him, Leary remained quiet, a shadow in the dim room. He did not try to bridge the silence, but he noticed something small. She no longer turned her face away from him when he entered. It was not warmth, not yet even trust, but it was change. He lay awake long after, staring into darkness. He had sworn to bend without breaking, yet already he felt the slow strain of expectation pulling at him from every side. The nobility wanted a docile pawn, Earth wanted a savior, and the girl at his side wanted only to vanish from the eyes that condemned her. Somewhere within that tangle, he would have to find his own path. He closed his eyes and repeated the words that had become his mantra: "Humanity bows to no empire." The vow anchored him against sleep, carrying him forward into the uncertainty of what lay beyond this brittle peace. "You said." The first fractures appeared not in words but in glances. Elias noticed how the Riley attendants would lower their eyes when Leary entered a room, not in respect but in dismissal, as if she were already erased from their regard. The nobles who once mocked Elias now directed their sharpest contempt toward her, as though her marriage to a human had stripped her of worth. Elias had assumed she was their prize pawn, chosen because her bloodline carried weight. Yet the more he watched, the more he saw the opposite. She was a piece set aside, moved only because no one else wished to bear the role. Confirmation came through Dr. Eric Sunlon, a human cultural analyst assigned to assist Elias in navigating Riley custom. Sunlon was a man of quiet speech and quick observation, more scholar than soldier, and he carried information like a surgeon's blade, precise, cutting deep with little warning. One evening, as they walked through the archives of the dynasty's library, Sunlon spoke with uncharacteristic bluntness. She was not honored by this marriage. She was discarded. Elias stopped, the words lodging in him like shrapnel. "Explain." Leary questioned their customs, refused certain expectations. In her house, that is rebellion enough to render her a burden. Sending her to you served two purposes. It shamed her and secured their advantage. She is not the jewel they boast of. She is the weight they meant to cast off. The revelation silenced Elias. For weeks he had imagined her tears as a reflection of contempt, her silence as disdain for the human bound to her. Yet if Sunlon spoke truth, her grief was not humiliation at him but abandonment by her own blood. He thanked the scholar with a curt nod, though inside a slow current of unease began to stir. The following days sharpened that current into conviction. Giris spoke little, but Elias began to notice how her hands trembled faintly when her brother appeared in the chamber. The man, Rylan of the first line, carried himself with the arrogance of inheritance. His words toward Elias were always edged, but it was the disdain he directed at his sister that struck deeper. One evening, he cornered Elias in a corridor where the bioluminescent walls glowed dim with night cycle light. "You will remember your station, human. My sister may be bound to you, but her blood is Rylian, and you will not drag it through your barbarism. Fail her dignity, and Earth will pay the cost." Elias met his gaze, unblinking. "Bloodlines mean little to me. Deeds weigh heavier." The alien stiffened, light flaring briefly along the patterns of his skin, but Elias did not yield. They parted with words unspoken, yet the exchange hardened Elias's resolve. He had entered this union believing himself a pawn. Now he saw the truth. Giris was as much a pawn as he. Both of them were currency, traded for convenience, dismissed when inconvenient. That night, for the first time, Giris spoke more than formality. She sat by the window while Elias removed his uniform jacket, the air between them heavy, with unasked questions. "You do not bow as they expected," she murmured, her voice soft but clear. Elias turned, surprised by the sound of it. "I was not bred to bow." Her eyes flickered to him, luminous yet fragile. "Then you are already braver than I." The words carried no bitterness, only quiet resignation. He did not press her further, but he stored them away like a compass. She had been raised to silence, taught to vanish into obedience. He would not demand more than she could give, but he would not allow her to be erased. In public gatherings, the hostility grew. Nobles provoked him with veiled insults, testing the limits of his restraint. Elias responded with calculated precision, never flaring into anger, but striking with words sharp enough to cut. When one remarked that humans were quick to kneel, Elias replied evenly, "Quick to stand, too." History records which posture endures. The chamber quieted, and though whispers followed, no one dared press him further that evening. Admiral Holt warned him afterward, "You walk a blade's edge, Elias. Earn too much of their notice, and they'll cut you down for it. Subtlety is a survival skill, too." Elias inclined his head but felt no regret. Each retort was not merely for himself. It was for the girl at his side, who bore their disdain in silence. If he could not ease her burden, he could at least refuse to add to it. The shift came slowly. Servants who once sneered began to hesitate before mocking him. Courtiers who mocked the human groom now measured their words. Even Giris' posture began to change. She no longer shrank quite so far into herself when entering a chamber. Her gaze lingered longer, steadier, as if borrowing strength from his defiance. She spoke little still, but silence no longer seemed the mark of surrender. It felt like waiting. One evening, after a particularly tense council session, Elias stepped out onto a balcony overlooking the alien city. The towers glowed like veins of fire across the dark horizon. Behind him, he heard the faint sound of footsteps. Giris emerged, her eyes reflecting the city's shimmer. For a long moment, she simply stood beside him, hands folded, head bowed. Then, almost imperceptibly, she straightened. Elias glanced at her, saying nothing. She did not cry. The tears that had haunted her face at their first meeting were absent now, replaced by something quieter but stronger. Hope, perhaps, fragile as glass but present nonetheless. The realization stirred something unfamiliar in Elias's chest, not triumph, not tenderness, but a conviction sharper than duty. He had been sent here to bend, to carry the weight of debt through ceremony. Yet if her tears had stopped because of him, even slightly, then this union was no longer only survival. It was a chance to prove that humanity could not only endure but inspire. The night wind carried the sound of alien songs across the city. Elias stood beside his unwilling bride, both silent, both changed. For the first time, he felt the balance shifting, not toward submission, but towards something unanticipated and dangerous, the beginning of defiance that could not be unseen. You said. The challenge came not with ceremony, but with accusation. A rival branch of the Rylian dynasty petitioned the High Council, declaring the union invalid. Their argument was simple. Humans were beneath the law, incapable of fulfilling sacred vows. If the claim stood, Earth would lose its reprieve, debts reinstated with interest, and Elias himself reduced to a mockery to be paraded as evidence of failure. The chamber where the dispute was held thrummed with tension, every noble waiting to see if the human would cower. Elias entered with his uniform pressed, his steps measured, every line of his bearing carved from discipline. He had been prepared for battles fought with steel and fire, never for one waged in words before alien aristocrats. Yet as the accusations poured forth, he felt the old calm of command settle over him. When the rival patriarch sneered that humanity could not comprehend the depth of oath bond, Elias rose. His voice carried without falter, each syllable sharp as a blade. He spoke not of human inferiority, nor of alien superiority, but of the nature of vows themselves, that an oath gains worth only through the will to keep it, not the bloodline of the one who swears. If my word is dismissed because of my species, then it is not my honor that is hollow, but your law, he said, steel burning in every word. Silence spread across the chamber, broken only by the uneasy stirrings of those who had come to mock him. The council attempted to press him, twisting language and precedent, but Elias countered with relentless logic. Every insult they cast he deflected by reframing it as hypocrisy. To deny his oath, he argued, was to admit that their laws were ornaments rather than truth. His words were not poetry, but precision, the kind of precision honed from years of issuing commands where hesitation meant death. By the time he finished, the chamber no longer buzzed with scorn but with unease. Forcing his defeat now would expose cracks in their own authority, and none of them wished to risk it. Captain Rhys-Marin, a younger officer who had once served under Elias, stood waiting outside the chamber. His loyalty had always been fierce, and in the days of uncertainty he had rallied the few human soldiers present, reminding them that their commander was not merely a groom but the embodiment of their people's dignity. When Elias emerged, Rhys saluted with sharp precision, his voice carrying enough for others to hear. "You made them listen, sir. That's more than anyone expected." Elias returned the gesture with a nod, though inwardly he knew it was not victory yet, only a reprieve, a sliver of ground held firm. The attempt to undermine him did not end in words. Assassins struck 2 nights later, shadows cloaked in light-bending technology, their blades forged to pierce armor. Elias awoke to the hum of intrusion alarms and the sudden stillness of the chamber. Without hesitation he moved, instincts carrying him through the dark. The attackers were swift, but he had spent his life measuring threats by fractions of seconds. He intercepted the first with a strike that sent the blade skittering across the floor, seized the arm of another, and used its momentum to break the assassin against the wall. When the third closed in on Leary, Elias crossed the distance like a storm, his body colliding with hers to drag her from the weapon's path. The skirmish ended quickly. Bodies sprawled across the crystal floor, light patterns on their skin flickering out. Elias stood over them, chest heaving, one hand still gripping the hilt of a captured blade. Leary, pressed against the wall, looked at him not with fear but with a steadiness that startled him. Her voice, quiet yet clear, cut through the silence. "They thought you were caged. They were wrong." In the aftermath, the council could not deny the truth. The human groom had not cowered, nor faltered, nor failed in his vows. He had defended the honor of the house with a ferocity even their own warriors would envy. Whispers shifted. No longer was he merely a pawn to be ridiculed. Now he was a figure they could not easily dismiss. The same nobles who had mocked him now measured their tones more carefully, and the same servants who had sneered now bowed their heads a fraction lower. Yet Elias knew respect born of fear was a fragile thing. He did not mistake it for acceptance. Standing with Holt and Sunlan in a quiet chamber afterward, he said, "They will strike again, in words or in steel. But each time they do, we show them we are not what they believe." That is how we endure. Holt grunted in approval, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of pride, rare and unspoken. The change in Leary was subtler, yet more profound. She no longer sat apart from him in gatherings. Instead, she walked at his side, her steps measured, her gaze no longer lowered. Where once she had been silent, she now answered when addressed, her voice steady. Her tears, which had marked every memory Elias first held of her, had vanished. They were not replaced by smiles, nor by sudden affection, but by something stronger, resolve. Their bond was not romance, not yet, but a partnership forged in defiance. Elias treated her not as obligation but as equal, and in return, she stood taller in the shadow of his strength. The nobles who sought to break them instead created something more dangerous, a unity neither of them had chosen, but both had embraced. On the balcony overlooking the alien city, Elias spoke at last, not to himself but to her. They thought me chained, but every chain they place, I use to build a foundation. Not for me, for us. She turned to him, her luminous eyes reflecting the starlight. No words passed her lips, but none were needed. Her silence no longer carried sorrow. It carried faith. Far below, the city pulsed with alien light, indifferent and eternal. But Elias felt the weight of change pressing in like the edge of a storm. Humanity had entered the galaxy on its knees, burdened by debts and mocked as primitives. Now, through one man and one unwanted union, the first cracks in that perception had begun to spread. The war for dignity was far from over, but Elias knew the truth as surely as he knew the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Humanity bows to no empire. And with Leary beside him, no force in the galaxy would make him yield.